Welcome to another installment of my devlog. I'm trying to get better at them, to be less confused and more structured. So what I've been working on is adding textures and sprites to it. We can see that it can animate the rotation at least. There's 3 different settings. There is clipping, which means, which we won't see here, that if the available space is smaller than the sprite, it will clip it off, and we can see the bounding box is depends on the orientation, which is why it bounces in the preserve aspect ratio. There's also stretch, but stretch cannot rotate. Stretch is a bit weird because I'm not sure what the best way for stretch and rotation to work at all. And I'll explain it in a second, but without rotation we can stretch. Let me explain why rotation is such a problem for stretch. So when we have a box, then there's a question, how do we rotate this in a way that satisfies the stretch condition? What does stretch mean in this case? We could say we should maintain the same bounding box. Maintain bounding box. Which is fine, because if we have a square, we could draw the sprite like this in here. But it becomes a problem because on the diagonal here, to maintain the bounding box, so what basically happens is we have, if this is one edge of the texture, as this advances towards the 45-degree angle here, these 2 corners move in closer and closer until they're exactly in this corner at the same time, meaning on a 45-degree angle, there's a singularity. That's awkward. That means on a 45-degree angle, a stretched image doesn't exist. So that's odd and unintuitive. We could also say, instead of maintain bounding box, maximize area, so that we're trying to draw the rectangle into here at any angle where the area here, we're maxing it out. But that'll lead to really weird skewing, because these lengths will adjust quite aggressively. It'll look squished and other things. The math is also quite... It's not complicated, it's not complex, but it's ugly. And it's hard to intuitively predict what it actually will look like at all. And so that's also sort of weird. And then there's another thing. And that is no clip. No clip or just clip. But that with stretch is weird because we already have clipping. But we could essentially just take the same square here, fill it, and then just, I'm gonna draw it a bit smaller, just rotate it and accept that we're drawing outside of the bounding box. But that is one of the invariants in my UI framework that I want to keep, is no drawing outside of your bounding box. Maybe that's okay for stretch. I don't honestly know. Or you would just clip it off here, but then this is no different from the clipping strategy, except that we force a specific size onto it. which is maybe a strategy I want anyway to include. And for aspect ratio, I might want to include a parameter whether it maintains the bounding box or if it maintains the size this bounding box, then with clipping, obviously. Because if we go back to preserve alpha, we can see that it changes sizes. And for sprites that you can rotate that are circular in nature, that's kind of ugly anyway. So we could accept that we're just clipping off things, but maintain the size. Or a sprite has always the padding in here of the shorter diagonal. Longer diagonal? I think the longer diagonal. So that it always fits into a bounding box and then it's just centered in here. But that's also inelegant because then it doesn't like rotation just introduces a lot of problems that I didn't think about when I started adding rotation. But it's necessary for tokens, for example, to be able to rotate them. If you think about a character, a 2D game, where the character can freely spin. Maybe that shouldn't be part of the UI framework then. I don't know yet. Anyway, a texture consists of an idea of some texture that is stored on the GPU so that the UI framework itself doesn't need to know what kind of backend this is supporting. It has a preferred size that either determines the aspect ratio for preserve aspect ratio or the actual size for clip mode. And stretched kind of sort of completely ignores this anyway. Maybe I should move the sizing into the aspect, into the strategy here as well. A UV rect, that is a subsection in normalized coordinates of the texture itself. Let me. So if we have a texture, let me actually grab one. Just give me a second. One of my test textures. Where are you? Test texture. There we go. Okay, so with the UV rect, for example, I could just select this area here and just render that. And let's assume these are like animation. No, let's say this is a tiled map, like in Pokemon, where you have, this could be, for example, path. This could be grass, etc. Different textures for different tiles. Then you could load the entire texture with one ID onto the GPU. And based on the type of tile that you're drawing, just select which part of this texture you're gonna draw. It's called a texture atlas. And it's much more efficient to draw it that way because you're only loading one texture onto the GPU. You're not constantly switching pipelines, and you can draw them all in one graphics render pass. This is also something I may need to do for text in the future. Currently, I render each text letter individually, which is not very efficient. So this is also sort of preparation for that. And another thing you can do is animations. These could be also individual animation frames, and then as the animation progresses, you could be just selecting a different frame as well. So you wouldn't have to store 20 different textures for a animation that has 20 frames. You could just have one texture with 20 sections in it. It's a common strategy. Right, so that is what this UV rect is. That allows us to do that. It is in normalized display coordinates. So, sorry, it's in normalized texture coordinates. So 0, 0 is top left, 1, 1 is bottom right. If I want to keep it that way, I don't know yet. Because everything else is in pixels. Sort of, except with aspect ratio. I don't know yet. Tint just changes the color. It just multiplies the color of the texture with this color. And white is 1, 1, 1, 1, so it doesn't change anything. But if we make this, let's say green, then we see that the color changes. Useful for text, maybe useful for sprites, for like if we think about status conditions like poison or something, you could tint it a purple. Obviously, you might just turn the alpha of this down to 0.1. I actually would need to look at my color mixing here, what this actually does. Ideally, the tint would have a 0.1. Yeah, no, it's not what I thought. Yeah. Ideally, the tint would have now an effect of 0.1 on it and not be a full multiplication. But then one would need to do just keep everything at 1. This doesn't change anything. And let's tone down blue and red slightly, so this should be slightly greener. Basically, you'd need to subtract your tint from white. The inverse of it. Yeah, now it's slightly greener. I don't know if one can tell. Let's set it to 5. I'm not sure one can tell at all. Oh wait, I'm not color mixing, I'm just hard multiplying them, is that it? No, it works now. What? Maybe I should just look at the sprite. Yeah, it works. I forgot the sprite itself was already sort of greenish. Yeah, but the color mixing is a thing I might wanna look at specifically. How concretely to do this. But that's what the point of tint is. For textures, I imagine it will nearly always be just white. I might want to introduce other terminology for, instead of color, like a tint or something that encompasses this more. And the way the thing itself works is not that complicated. We have a fit strategy with clip and preserve aspect ratio. I'm not sure I want to define interpolation over at any, because it's sort of weird. What does it mean to interpolate between stretch and preserve aspect ratio? What does that even mean? But for now, there's one defined. We just saw the parameters, and then all we do is in clip, we just grab our preferred size. In stretch, we simply grab a max width and max height. Unless we have no space limitation, that's what happens with none, then we just default to the preferred size. And stretch does not have a rotation. I might allow the 90-degree rotations. So up clockwise 90, 180, and then anti-clockwise 90 degrees, because that still works. We don't have any issues with that. But for now, it's just no rotation. Aspect ratio, we compute the size of the rotated rectangle that would still fit into the bounding box. So we need to rescale the max width by the aspect ratio and cosinus and sin, which is just rotation matrix here, basically. And if we are only limited in one dimension, then we're picking whatever that dimension is and staying within that one. Otherwise, we just fall back to our preferred size. Because if we have infinite space, what size are we supposed to be? We could say we also have no size, but preferred size seems to be the most reasonable one. And then we rotate our size. Rotation just does what the name implies. It simply turns the bounding box, or rather it computes the bounding box that would contain this turned bounding box, right? That is the all right, it's a square. We don't see it in a square. Here, this is what rotate computes as this bounding box on the outside. Right, and then we just return the width and height, and we make sure we don't fall below the min size. And then drawing, we sort of, the computer width and height might need to refactor this, not sure. And we're just gonna push the image primitive into our scene, and that's it. And all of that already existed before. My primitives already prepared them. The text uses the exact same thing. It's just not called image primitive. It's called a text primitive, and it doesn't matter. That'll allow us now to have 2D style interactions. We could implement a game like Pokemon with this without any issues. I'm thinking maybe I'm gonna go for first game instead of Virtual Tabletop RPG, maybe something like Factorio or Harvest Moon. So like, what's it called? Stardew Valley style game, because there's a lot less going on, and unlike a Virtual Tabletop RPG, it has a lot less dynamic rules, especially if you want to support different rule systems. And it might be a better idea to start with that first. So I'd probably pivot to a farming simulator for now in 2D. And that's it. See you around.